Welcome to our fourth part of our conversation with Pamela Perillo. If you haven't caught the previous parts yet, you're starting at the wrong place. You've missed some crucial moments. I really encourage you to watch the previous videos or catch it on the podcast if you prefer. If you've seen parts 1, 2, and 3, I bet you're ready to continue. In the previous episodes, Pamela shared her story of growing up in California, experiencing drugs and abuse, and taking the painful decision to leave her son to her father as she fled the state after a robbery. Not long after she arrived in Texas with her accomplices Mike and Linda, she took part in 2 murders. Pamela says the plan was just to rob the 2 men, but she has never denied her involvement in their death. One of the tough realities about the death penalty is that it can make criminals infamous while their victims fade into the background. Today, I want us to remember Robert Banks and Bob Skins, Pamela's victims from 1980. They were 30 and 26 years old when they were killed. Their death still weighs heavily on Pamela's mind. Nearly 45 years later, she still reflects on what she did. Before we continue our conversation, she asked me to add a few words about Robert, Bob, and their families. You wanted to say a few words about your first trial again and how you got to be in touch with the families of the victims.
During my first trial, when my victims' families came in to testify, and I heard all that they went through and everything that I took from them and the pain that I caused them, it affected me so bad that it was so hard for me to not want to reach out and try to talk to them. But the court wouldn't allow me to do that. And I always wanted to be able to tell them how sorry I was. And when I went back and I had my execution date, I got a letter from Mrs. Skeens, and it was a typed line, and it said, "Please go on and die and give us some closure." And she had her address on the envelope, so I wrote her back a really long letter. And I told her how very sorry I was, and that I know that sorry just sounds like words, but that I was truly, truly sorry, and that I wish she could look inside my heart and see how awful sorry I am for what I took from them. And I told her that if taking my life would bring back her son and what I took from them, I would take my own life. But I couldn't do that. All I could do is just keep bettering myself and hope that someday they would forgive me. Not so much for me, but for themselves and the peace it would give them.
So it was the mother of one of the victims, and you got in touch with the sister of this same victim.
Well, yes, when I wrote the letter, the mother didn't write me back, but Bob Skeen's sister, her name was Debbie, wrote me back and sent me a picture of one of my victims, which was her brother, and told me all that I had taken from them, and that he was her best friend, and that She could call him anytime in the middle of the night and he would be there for her. She told me a lot about her life and the things that she went through and how her brother helped her through all of that. We wrote for about 6 months with each other, and she was a Christian, and we talked a lot about the Bible and everything. And about 6 months after I wrote to her, I got a letter from her telling me, Pam, I do forgive you, and you are my sister in Christ, but I can't write you anymore because my mother feels like you're taking another one of her children away. And so we stopped writing to each other, and I was really sad about it, but I understood, and I haven't heard from them since.
And since then, you've been praying and praying
Yes.
over and over.
I never stop praying for them. I pray that they will find forgiveness in their heart and peace. I am so sorry for what I did and what I caused them. I can't even begin to understand what I put them through and the pain that I caused them.
In the following month, you become the only female on death row, facing the possibility of being the first woman executed since the mid 1800s.
Yes.
This is still at the beginning of the 1980s, and Mike, your accomplice, is about to go on trial. And the prosecution in his case comes to you with a deal. What is the deal and what is your response?
The prosecutor in Mike Brittle's case came and offered me a life sentence to testify against Mike. I was back at the county on a bench warrant, and I told him no. I don't believe in the death penalty, and I'm not going to testify against him to get myself off death row and get him on death row. It would go against everything that I believed in. So I turned it down. I told him I would get off death row on my own. Mike wrote me a letter through his attorneys and told me thank you for not testifying against me.
That's a tough decision, and I guess many people would have done differently.
Yeah.
This guy was horrible. He had been horrible with you, and you had the occasion to save your own life, and you preferred to refuse the deal.
Yes, I don't believe in the death penalty, and it would go against everything that I believe in. If I say I don't believe in the death penalty, why would I get somebody the death penalty? So, no, I didn't feel right doing that at all.
Ultimately, he received the death penalty.
He did.
After he received it, did you have any regrets on not having accepted the deal?
No, none at all. I knew that he was more than likely going to receive the death penalty. Mike had a pretty bad record. They were comparing him to Charles Manson. So the court didn't like Mike at all, and he had a lot of issues. But I'm glad I didn't take that deal. I would have felt so bad getting someone the death penalty, and I don't believe in it. And you're right, it's hard to, are you going to save your own self? But I felt it would have been wrong for me to do that. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I'd done something like that. And the DA was pretty surprised that I turned it down.
In 1983, the judgment of your trial is overturned because the jury selection was flawed. You are sent back to a brand new Harris County jail. Did you expect such a decision?
No, I was very, very surprised. I know it was overturned on something that happened with the juror. I really didn't understand it other than I think the judge denied my attorneys to ask a juror a question, a prospective juror. The higher court overturned it based on that. And so I got off. They told him I had to have a new trial.
During your annual checkup at that time, you discovered you had a cancer.
Yeah. First, what they did was they did a cone biopsy, where they go in and take a cone-sized piece of your uterus out. I had cancer in 5 different spots of my uterus, so they went in and they took a cone-sized piece of my uterus out. And 6 months later, it came back and it was spreading.
You know you will face this other trial, and you also need to fight against your cancer. And during the pre-trial, your weight drops from 150 pounds to 86 pounds. And what happens next?
I got very sick in the county. I was losing a lot of blood from the cancer, and I got really, really sick. I wasn't able to eat, and I did lose a lot of weight. I was stressing a lot. Not only did I have uterus cancer, but I had a lump in my breast, and my real mother, had her breast removed from breast cancer. So it ran high in my family, and they were pretty concerned about all of that. It turned out to be fibrocystic lumps, which is great, but I did have to have the hysterectomy. It was all during trying to get my trial rolling, and I ended up staying in the county for 22 months, waiting to be able to go to trial.
During these years, did you receive any news from your son and from your father?
I had a friend that was in the county jail with me, and she went to these people's house when she got out of jail, and I was calling her over there, and the lady of the house, Christina, would talk to me on the phone, and her husband was an attorney and good friends with my attorneys. She asked me if she could come visit me one day, and I said sure. Well, it ended up being her and her husband, my 2 attorneys, all went to California to talk to my father and my stepmother. And my father and my son and my older sister all came back to Texas. So I got to see them all day in the courtroom during our lunch break.
So it was the first time since 5 years or so, right?
It was my first time.
Since you had dropped Joseph at your father's house.
They brought my son out, and my dad came, and my stepmother came, and my older sister, and then my younger sister came out. So I got to see them in the courtroom, and then they went home.
And it's the last time that you see your father?
Yes, it was the last time. My dad died in '87 of bone cancer. And then my little sister and my son came back. So during that time, I decided I was going to keep my son in Texas. And he ended up staying here with my friend Christina and her husband Bud. And what they did was, because Bud was a lawyer, he took me to court and adopted me under him and Christina. So I legally became their daughter at 28 years old, and my son became their grandson. And that way they would have legal rights to him while he was here.
When your father died, nobody told you?
I found out 16 days after he was dead and buried that he died. Apparently he had been sick for about 6 months in the hospital. and my older brother, Randy, stayed with them. But nobody told me, and they didn't even tell me. They told Christina, and she called the jail, the prison, and let me know that my dad had died and that he had already been dead and buried before they ever told anybody.
And at that time, you have some news from Mike, your accomplice in the murders. Tell me what he did on death row.
Well, 2 days before my second trial was to begin, I got a newspaper article that said that my accomplice, Mike Brittle, threw a homemade bomb in on a black man on death row and burned him severely. My name was right there in the article because I was his accomplice, and there was just a whole lot of bad publicity, and I'm sure the jurors read it, and so it was pretty bad, and I was pretty mad because he did that, but that's the way he was.
So let's say a few words about him. His marriage with Linda was annulled, and Linda was sentenced to 5 years probation.
Yes.
And at the time of your second trial, she was free, right?
When I had my evidentiary hearing in federal court, she testified on video, and she was home. So yeah.
So when your trial, your second trial begins, your lead attorney isn't here. That's only the beginning of big issues that you will have.
Yes, my attorney was in California with Linda during my jury selection of my trial. He just left. And it turns out that my attorney, Jim Skelton, was actually Linda's attorney during her proceedings on turning state evidence, getting anonymity, and getting an annulment on Mike so that she could testify against him and not be his wife anymore. So yeah, it was pretty bad.
And how did this relationship create a problem in your own trial?
They should have never given me Jim Skelton as a court-appointed attorney in my case because it was a conflict of interest because he was involved in Linda's case and he was having an affair with her. So that turned out to all be a big mess.
Linda testified against you?
Yes.
And your own attorney was or had been her attorney too. And they had a relationship.
A sexual relationship. It was hard to go through all that.
But at that time, you didn't know about all these conflicts of interests.
I didn't.
So you just wonder why your attorney tells you not to say anything, not to respond to Linda.
I didn't know any of that was going on.
After this second trial, you are once again condemned to death penalty by lethal injection. How's your feeling when you learned this?
I thought, here we go again, and I really thought I would be executed this time, getting the death penalty for the second time. When they went in for my appeal, my attorneys wanted to drop all my grounds of error except 2, conflict of interest and ineffective counsel. They wanted to drop all other grounds, but I could not go back and pick those up. So if I went into the court with 2 grounds of error, that's all I had, was 2 grounds of error. And if they denied that, I could not go back and pick up those other grounds of error. They felt like those 2 things were so strong, but they knew a whole lot more than I knew about what was going on with Skelton and Linda. So they really felt like those errors were strong enough for the court to look at them.
For 7 years, 4 of you are on death row, 4 female, including your dear friend Carla Tucker. There's a portrait of her just here. And another inmate called Frances Elaine Newton, whom you believed to be innocent, right?
Yes, I do. I believe that Frances was innocent. And it was so sad to me when they did kill her. And her mother and her sister were trying so hard to save her life. So it was really sad. It was the 4 of us, Carla, Betty, Frances, and I, for a long time on death row. Yeah, like you said, I think it was 7.5 years. It was the 4 of us.
It's during this period of time that your relationship to God really changed, right?
It did. I got so into God for so long, and when I went through Carla's execution, when they killed Carla, I threw my Bible away. I was so angry at God because Carla kept saying that God told her he was going to release her into Dana's arms. And when she went through 40 days of fasting with Dana and was so strong in her belief that God was going to release her, and when he didn't, I got angry. I thought it was awful, and I threw my Bible in the trash, and I wouldn't pray. I wouldn't do nothing. I was so angry.
Thank you for watching this 4th part. The 5th one will be online soon. I encourage you to check out the book Salvation on Death Row if you'd like to know more about Pamela Perillo's life. And a special thanks to our subscribers. Your support helps YouTube show Death Row stories to new people. Don't forget to comment, to like, to share. And you can subscribe to both the YouTube channel and the podcast. It's always a pleasure to see you are more and more to follow us. Thank you.